Why don't you just start?
Are you already running?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh, good. Hi, Mom. Happy Mother's Day.
Well, yeah, happy Mother's Day, Bart. This has been
Mother Earth Day. Right?
Mother Earth Day. It's been a great weekend with all the former Earth First musicians, a lot of nostalgia, a lot of singing our old anthems. You're really well known you're known for a lot of things, the Wilderness Support Center, but also as the founder of Earth First, and you were the only person in the original Earth Firsters who was a singer-songwriter and musician, and so you were always prominent with your guitar at events and road shows in the early years. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you started playing music and how you integrated music into your conservation work over the years.
Yeah. My dad was a music professor, and my mom was an art teacher. So you can tell where the progressive artsy genes came from. I had no choice in the matter. Plus, it's not only being born on John Muir's birthday. I was born the exact, this is the spooky part, the exact day that Aldo Leopold died. When he was fighting the fire, and he died that day. It was that same morning that I popped up at the end of the world.
Wow.
Little did I know that I was going to end up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, going to high school within 50 miles of where Howard Zahniser was, ensconced in his cabin, drafting up the Wilderness Act, it's like crazy stuff. When I was in high school, I had no idea that the Wilderness Act was being debated in D.C. because in New York State, for clarification, which hatched some great conservation leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, Bob Marshall, and others. Not that I would even, hold a candle to those guys. My goal's always been to at least stumble in their footsteps.
Done well.
And do the best I could. But Zahniser was there, but I was working on getting through high school, and then I went to college, and there were no federal lands in New York State. It was all state lands, and then it was set aside by state constitution in 1885. It was 1885. That's how far back it went. And it was set for Forever Wild, which also happens to be the name of Jim Stoltz's song. But that's in the Constitution, and that standard was set by where I ended up going to high school and college. But to get back to the music part, there was always music in our house. My dad wanted me to be the pianist. I wanted to play baseball instead, and so we compromised and ended up being the percussion section. Because there were 4 kids. Each one played a different set of instruments, and my dad was off being the assistant conductor for the New York Philharmonic and under Morton Gould, and he was teaching conducting at Columbia. All of this as second jobs, because he was teaching a top-notch band in Great Neck, New York. I don't readily admit that I grew up in my early years anywhere near New York City. Most people think I was born in Wyoming or some podunk place somewhere, which I would have been happier probably that way. But my parents made the decision after being camp counselors at this highfalutin summer camp. They basically wanted to stay in the Adirondacks and not go back to suburbia and all this. And I hope you do some good editing on this shit. But basically, when I started ninth grade, they said the heck with going back. And they agreed that if they could both find teaching jobs within 50 miles of where they had bought a house, just inside the boundaries of Adirondack Park, that they would stay. But they had to do it in a week. And they didn't tell me about it, which was wise, because I would have been a nervous wreck. So we'd wake up a week later, and my folks say, well, you're staying. It was the start of my ninth grade year, and I went from a huge, school system down to this school that had 100 people in starting the class, and ended up with 76 people graduating. And so I was kind of a medium-sized fish in a smaller pond, and I just found my home in the woods. And
were you the oldest or middle?
I was the youngest.
You were the youngest.
I was the youngest, and I wasn't even supposed to happen because my parents had kind of said, okay, 3 is enough. But they got real romantic one night after seeing the Broadway show Brigadoon.
Oh, really?
Which is, full of love songs and all this good stuff. And my mother always called me the Brigadoon baby because they basically got a little sloshed and kind of said, well, let's go for it. So
more reason for your musical background conceived to a musical.
And it was funny because there's a Lorax facet to this too. The Lorax wasn't even written when I was a young tyke. But my dad, he was a very mild-mannered, very stern. He was 100% German. My mom her family was from Wales and from New Zealand. Her father had been a coal miner in Wales, and so all this kind of mixed. And she had a love of flowers inherited from her father, because he left the coal mines and went to the United States and became kind of keeper of an estate near Brockport. And so he just had a green thumb, and everything grew around him, and it was pretty amazing. But the Lorax thing, I started hugging trees without ever knowing it. When my dad, who was my easygoing guy, he discovered a chainsaw. Because we were cutting trees down to clear out some of what was second or third growth back then, and we were using all the hand tools, the axes, the PVs, the chains, and we were cutting wood, ironically, for the local pulp mill. And you shave them, and you stack them up, and then you send them to the pulp mill at 4-foot lengths. But the fact that he discovered the chainsaw changed everything. We went from hand tools, and I kept using the hand tools, and he got the damn chainsaw. And so the conflict started when he said, well, we can knock these out. And everything was faster, and everything was noisier, and everything was uglier. And I kept saying, God, here I was like 13 or so. And I said, God damn it, Dad, you don't need to cut down any more fucking trees. You got enough. And then he goes, oh, and then we start getting into these arguments. And little did I know that I was turning into a freaking Lorax, and he ended up looking like one after a while. Either by the Lorax or the Yosemite Sam or the cross of the two. But that's where it started, if you want to really pin it down. And he could only spank me only so many times before I got bigger and it's crazier enough that when I pulled I almost swung at him one time, and when that was the last. That was like
last time he raised his hand to you.
Said, so we both agreed. Said we better stop this right now. And my poor mom, she was so frustrated about it. But so meanwhile, she was doing Rachel Carson. She was reading Rachel Carson back in the early '60s, and growing flowers and all this good stuff. And I don't know, as a drummer, my dad was,
You were drumming at that time. By the time you were
I was destined to be this drummer guy, whether I knew it or not. But I ended up, my dad, it is mostly because of where they were in these summer camps. Before we went to the Adirondacks, we were out by the Berkshires. And I don't know if you ever heard of Ted Mack. He was this famous guy, had an amateur hour show, and yeah, okay. And my dad was the music director for this summer camp. And
in the Adirondacks.
no, this was in the Berkshires.
Oh, the Berkshires.
So we were not as grand as the Adirondacks, but you know, some nice rural country. And that's where I took my first drum lessons, because we had agreed that I would be the drummer. But I was 7 years old, and I took my first drum lessons from a guy named Charlie Smith, who was the head drummer of the Boston Symphony freaking Orchestra.
Wow.
And I'm kind of, you know, but that's the kind of thing you don't get exposed to very, very readily. And one thing led to another, and by the time I was 10, my dad, by his connections in New York City, scraped together a bunch of, you know, like Slingerland drum set, but a small one, and then a big ass tom-tom stand, you know, a floor tom-tom. It was a Ludwig. It was a little off color on the pearl white. The Slingerland thing was a good tom-tom and a great, you know, a nice little cymbal, and it was a tight little thing. And the big Zildjian cymbal with a big bell on it that you could get a nice ring to it. And my dad had put all this together, and when I woke up on my 10th birthday, and there it was sitting in our living room. And I go, holy cow. And the next thing you know, I'm back, and he's playing, he played cornet amongst 18 other instruments. And my first professional job was playing drums behind him at a wedding reception for $10. That was the beginning of my checkered semi-professional, sometimes maybe, you know, musical adventure. So
I never knew that you played drums until this weekend. I always saw you with a guitar, but you came to this event this weekend with a whole bunch of drums, including one sitting right next to you. What is that?
This is a hand drum. This is made by an old friend of ours named Jim Watson, who we met in Alaska. And we had one like this that I bought, and you can buy these. This is like a cajon, like the one you sit on. There's other ones. There's a Virginia with Bill Oliver. She had a T-shaped one. This one is an octagonal one. It doesn't have a snare built in. And the one that I had bought was stolen from the back of our pickup truck. And if you look at, you get different tones through here. But what happened was, I played drums all the way through high school. We played dances for the different high schools around the area. And then the first band was a surfer band. And so I learned how to play Wipeout.
Yeah.
And then went from that to, in college, we were like the most popular beer party band in Albany, New York. And he actually had a scene straight out of the Blues Brothers where, you know, they have the chicken wire in between the band and the audience. So if everybody's throwing peanuts or beer bottles or something, they wouldn't get hit with any items. That actually happened to us when we went to played in this bar, and it turned out to be a rival college in that town. It was hilarious. But when I ended up going to grad school, when my brother and I went up to the University of Wyoming together, I left my drums behind because I knew I couldn't take them, all the way out to Wyoming, for God's sakes.
They have them in a dorm room.
Right, and so I left them with my dad, and he gave them to the local college there in Plattsburgh, near the Adirondacks. And I took
Is that when you picked up guitar?
I picked up guitar in probably 9th or 10th grade. That was when the folky, the Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul and Mary and Where Have All the Flowers Gone and 500 Miles, and Joan Baez in particular. And that we formed a little folk group. And so I started learning the basic guitar stuff. And I couldn't go to some party and play Wipeout 100 times because, it'd take you half the night to put the drum set together. And the other half the night, when you're done playing the dance, everybody's walking off and you're still packing it away. But,
why did you go to Wyoming from New York? How did you get connected to Wyoming?
That was, talk about an incredible sequence of events. Wyoming is, when we moved up to the Adirondacks, I found my home. Rural, wild country, canoeing, hiking, getting out in the woods, and really not knowing what was going on exactly in the larger world. Ironically, in high school, when you end up having to sell magazines or whatever to earn credit to go to Washington, D.C. to see how your government works.
Right.
I was, I was adhering to that, and we were all earning our credits. And there was this one student named Toby who was crippled, and he really wanted to go to Washington, D.C., and he didn't have a whole lot of credits. And I gave him my credits and without thinking about it, I said, well, I may show up in Washington, D.C. someday, but if this is that important to you, go for it. Little did I know what was in store for me. But the Wyoming thing, my brother and I, he was older than I was, and I had two brothers. I had a sister that was 8 years older. I had two brothers, one that was 5 years older and one that was 4 years older. And the one that was closest to me died in a car wreck when he was 20 and I was 16. And so I got closer to my other brother, who was kind of a wild guy, and he
runs in the family, I guess.
Yeah. Here, why don't you hang on to that? I'll show you that a little more later. So my brother started out playing the oboe, because my dad was into, my sister played my sister played the bassoon and she hated it. My one brother played the oboe, and then he graduated to saxophone and all this other stuff. The brother that got killed in the wreck, he started out as French horn, so you can tell where the music professor thing was going.
Right.
And I really wanted to play the timpani, because you can just wail on that stuff. You bam, 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 bam. And like I was wailing on the drum yesterday. That was way fun. That was like doing a timpani thing. But my brother would do old rock and roll, and he and I would do this duo. In fact, we ended up playing at college together in grad school in Laramie, where we formed this little band, and it was just he and I, and we'd give concerts out at the door, and we'd just play nonstop. Old rock and roll songs, standards, St. School Marching In and all that stuff.
And you were playing guitar at that point rather than drums?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I had to have, there was still the performer thing. The music, sharing music with folks and having fun. Because frankly, my dad was like the ace musician. I had the dregs, essentially the dregs of the talent in the family. Everybody else had better voices and better technical skills. But I was the only one that had no hesitation to go up, and as long as I had a guitar in front of me or a drum set in front of me, I'd go out and sure, let's go for it. So for whatever reason, those genes sort of carried over from my dad. And my dad, he played in the 30s. When he was a young pup, he was playing cornet for a band called the Glenn Gray and the Casalermo Band. You should Google that sometime.
Was it a swing band or?
Yeah, and they were doing the circuit, and he was doing Reefer Madness, and he was just a young pup, and he ended up being an all-American soccer player, in addition to everything else.
Well, you're in Wyoming playing rock and roll with your brother.
Yeah, and that kept us sane. When we got to Wyoming, well, the interesting thing was, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I did know that I had a lot of fun playing music, but we weren't making enough money to do it full time,
Right.
and survive. And so the other twist to this was, in addition to being a beer party band drummer, when our fraternity, I was a fraternity guy and all that. I was a songmaster and all that. When it came to the parties itself that our fraternity would have, we formed this little group that I played guitar on, and we had 4 guys doing harmonies, Motown harmonies. And we were the 4 bottoms.
The 4 bottoms?
4 bottoms.
Were you all bass?
No, but we were all, badass. It actually worked. And so we would play in one of the band breaks and the Cheap Thrills and get dressed with a suit and tie, and then just for a show, and then we got done with it.
Is this like late 60s?
Yeah, I graduated from high school in '66.
Okay.
Was on the 5-year plan in Albany State because I wanted to stay playing with the band that I was with. So that went. So in '71, miraculously, I got into grad school.
And that's when you went to Wyoming?
Yeah.
Why Wyoming?
My brother and I had taken a road trip in his. Later in life, he had a band. He always had a band because he was a stone sculptor and a college professor. And I would end up doing all this grunt work, carrying these big rocks and loading the van up. Prior to that, he had a yellow Mustang convertible. And we'd cruise around the West doing the park bagging thing, And we saw Wyoming, and it was like, this is wide open. This is the Wild West. It's best you're ever going to find.
Was it the Tetons or the Wind Rivers?
We hit the Tetons. We hit it all. It was just, the whole place just called to me. And to top that off, that summer, so summer of '71, myself, we took a bet. Some of us were going to go to Alaska. Alaska fits in later in my life with Congress and all this stuff. I had no idea any of that stuff was coming to bear. And we were going to Alaska, and people were betting against us. Because it turned out with the Alaska Highway, you needed extra tires, you needed cash, and you needed all this other stuff. And so we got as far as Vancouver,
BC.
Realized we didn't have enough gear or weather or wherewithal to actually get through the customs, and they wouldn't let us on the Alaska Highway. So we said, well, shit, we don't want to lose this bet with our fraternity brothers. So we've got to find a way to get there. Well, it turned out we pooled all our money. I sold my guitar. We went to a pawn shop and cashed in on watches and everything else. Got enough money for a round-trip ticket to Ketchikan, Alaska, on a ferry.
On a ferry.
We had no money. We were doing the thing where you sort of hang out around after breakfast is served, and you know, somebody left a piece of toast that hadn't been chewed on or something. You grab it, stuff it. We lost 15 pounds in this whole kind of escapade. So we get up there, we stay for 24 hours, long enough to mail postcards to all our saying, "Ha, we made it." And then we took the ferry back, and then we hitchhiked. We split up, there were three of us. We split up and we hitchhiked across the U.S. and
back toward New York, you mean?
And that's where we sold the car and stuff. And we had some near-death experiences where, you know, so one guy who picked us up fell asleep at the wheel, and the other we got picked up with some guys that had the back of their pickup was full of stolen TVs. We almost got an Easy Rider scene where, you know, Jack Nicholson gets his shit kicked out of him. Yeah, well, we almost got a confrontation where we were trying to leave this town in Kansas called Sharon Springs. This town's still there, and there's, you know, a half dozen Little Abner type guys come, you know, these redneck guys are coming in, and I'm kind of an enlightened redneck anyway, so I'm not opposed to, you know, the real thing, but these guys had coveralls and wrenches sticking out of their pants, and my buddy and I are sitting on our backpacks.
Did you look like hippies? Or
Yeah. And fortunately, somebody at the nick of time, miraculously, this car showed up and said, "Get in quick!" And we jumped in, got out of there, and because these guys were maybe a couple hundred yards away from us, and
wow.
So we got back eventually to the Adirondacks. Before we had gone to on this journey, my brother had been accepted as to go to grad school in the art department, so he wanted to get his Master of Fine Arts so he could teach. And
which university in Wyoming was that?
This is the only university.
The only one. Cody, is that what it is?
Laramie.
Oh, on the east slope then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I know this gets a little convoluted here, but what happened was my brother had applied and he got accepted. Just before I left on this hitchhiking adventure or misadventure, I went ahead and filled out an application to the University of Wyoming to get a second degree, and a second bachelor's degree in outdoor recreation. My first degree was at Albany was in geography.
Geography.
And
interesting field.
And back then people say, "Oh, geography, you must know the capital of every state." We said, "No, it's about how humans relate to the land, and
right.
how they generally screw it up." And it was kind of a natural, and that was just when environmental studies programs were starting.
Yeah.
It's 1970, all that was starting to churn around. And
you're probably reading Donald Meinig, the famous historical geographer who talked about all the landscapes of America. And,
No. Well, my school wasn't that good. So I had this application, and I told my parents, I said, "Please hang on to that application. Don't mail it unless I ask you to. You know, just sit on it." And so on the way, I had skipped this part. When we were on our way out to go onto the Alaska Highway, we went through Glacier National Park. And we ended up going on for a day hike, which ended up being an overnight in a very crowded little metal storage shed thing in the middle of the North Fork of the Belly River. Because everybody was afraid of grizzly bears. There were like 10 people stuffed in this little shed. And so we hiked back. It was the first time I'd seen a grizzly. Very safe distance, thank God. And first mountain goats I ever saw, and it kept feeling the higher in elevation we got, the smaller the trees got. There was no chance in hell that we were going to climb a tree to get away from a bear, because the trees are like this big. And you kind of feel like somebody else is in charge of this place. I'm only here by the grace of the grizzly not being pissed off, and some other power, the creator, or as a friend of mine who's a Episcopalian minister, we call it the Great Mystery. Somebody else was in charge, and so that was the epiphany moment when I called my parents up and I said, "Please put that in the mail." So they sent the application in the mail. I get back from this near disaster, a hitchhiking trip. My brother's getting ready to go to grad school, and lo and behold, the letter is waiting there where I've been accepted to get a second bachelor's degree. Because I was a screw up in college. I'd been an honor student in high school, and then just went wild because that's what my brothers did, and that's what my parents, I found out later, kind of did. And so we ended up. We're driving to Laramie, and I start seeing these interesting cosmos, woo-woo, just really interesting stuff, where the county we're going to in Laramie is Albany County.
Where you were from?
Yeah, I'm looking at the map and saying, "Oh, Albany County." And I'm like thinking, what's up with that? And then we're going a little further, and there's a Saratoga west of Laramie. Going, oh, this is good. More interesting at the time. And then the name of our band was Otto Road. For an obscure reason, it was the name of a road near Albany that Sergeant Snorkel, Beetle Bailey.
Oh, Beetle Bailey.
The dog in the Beetle Bailey is named Otto.
Right.
We named our band after that dog. It was kind of crazy. But we're within 20 miles of Laramie, and there's this exit on the interstate that says Otto Road. So either this is going to be very good or it's going to be very bad. And we ended up, we get to Laramie, I meet with the head of the department. We go through my, full disclosure. I tell them I, dropped a lot of courses, kept finding things I didn't want to do, and then finally found stuff I wanted to do related to the environment and conservation. And he's going, well, New York has really top-notch schools. You obviously, when you applied yourself, you did well, and we went on this interview. And then he finally says, you can go to grad school if you want to. That went right over my head. And then he said, you could go to grad school. We'd take you as a grad student.
Instead of a second bachelor's degree, just right into a master's degree.
Oh, yeah. And
this is outdoor recreation. They had a degree program in outdoor recreation.
Yeah, it was a master's in outdoor recreation, resource management and planning. And if you ask somebody what the outdoor recreation resource is, they say, well, it's right there. It's your public land. It's
stone's throw away.
Yeah. So it took 3 times for the department head to say, you can go to grad school. Because in college I got like a 2.4 or something like that. But I was just screwing the pooch all the time. I'd sell my books before the end of the class. My goal was go to the first day of class, find out when the midterm was going to be, show up for that. We were all busy hiking in the Adirondacks. Any excuse we could do to get on the interstate and go north a couple hours and go bag a couple peaks. That was what we did. Or play in a band. I mean, it was like that. So the head of the department finally said, look, I'll be straight up with you. He said, I partied my way through college as well. And we will take you on probation. If you don't get a 3-point going into this thing, then you're out of here. So the pressure is all yours. So I had this big cowboy boot over my head. It's just saying, if you screw this up.
Did they have funding for you too?
Yeah.
Because that happens in grad school a lot.
Well, they didn't have funding for me, but it was really dirt cheap. Whatever it was affordable. And
your brother was going into grad school too,
he was
right?
already in.
Yeah.
And so here we are on this this brave new world opening up for us. And I called up my folks who had been totally disappointed in my behavior for this period of time. And that was long before other stuff. And told my mother that I wasn't going to disappoint him any longer. I found my calling. I found something I wanted to do, and I really wanted to, clean up my act and do that. And so that was the beginning. And so when my brother and I first got there, 100-mile-an-hour winds were blowing through town. And we went out when everybody else was hunkered down under their, beds or whatever. We went out with a football and we're playing kick-catch. You kick the ball and go as far as you can, and then you throw it and all that. But you couldn't even throw the ball into the wind because it goes onto Kansas somewhere. And so we got done running around, and people were just thinking we're totally crazy, which we pretty much were. And we were delighted to be, have a clean slate. And my brother and I looked at each other, and I said, the wind is going to drive us crazy, and we might as well just acknowledge that the wind's going to drive us crazy and we're going to stay, or the wind's going to drive us crazy and we're going to get the hell out of here. And we made the wind embraced us, for better or worse, helped build character, made things interesting. And so that's, all of a sudden, there was a wide open field.
New life.
Ended up doing my grad thesis on the Medicine Bow National Forest and the first rare review. And, those are written up in other books. And but my brother and I ended up singing together yeah. So we formed this little group, the two of us. And
was it like a folk group, or were you back to rock or party band?
We did everything. From Blue Suede Shoes to Hound Dog to 500 Miles to, and the funny part was, I was the guitar and we sang harmonies, and he was a virtuoso kazoo player.
Kazoo?
Kazoo. And he had this theory, which I still haven't verified, because I think he was muting the kazoo when he was actually thinking he was expanding the reach of the kazoo, where he would get an empty beer bottle in and blow the kazoo like a mute, with a whatever you call them. Anyways, so he would play the kazoo that way and think he was getting more expansive sound that way. And the other thing was, when people came in the door of the bar, which was named Pinky's
Bar.
they would get a free kazoo. So you can picture a couple hours into the night on a Friday or Saturday evening, and you'd have like 50 to 70 people playing kazoo along with whatever we were playing. So that was when I went to the guitar. And so when we did the Earth First stuff,
which is that's 10 years later, right? You went to grad school in '71, you said, in Laramie, and then by by 1981, you're founding Earth First. So
Yeah, so it's 71. I was in grad school 71, 72. Ended up with a 3.8.
nice.
Yeah, I should have
Department head was proud of you.
should have gotten a 4. I got nuked by my advisor. You know how advisors can be.
Keep pushing.
Yeah, he kept saying, well,
You can do
I
that.
got a 94 on the test, and he gave me a B, and I said, well, what can I do beyond that? He said, he was the kind of guy, well, being an academician or whatever you call it, I'm sure you had an advisor like this.
Maybe I was an advisor myself like that.
Probably. So we're in there. I'm working on my thesis, and my dad actually looked at my thesis and said, "This is actually more like 3 master's theses." But I did an evaluation of the Rollis area. Did a critique of how the Forest Service was. This is rare one.
Right.
It wasn't even called rare one.
That's just rare.
Yeah, and I did the field work and evaluated every area.
All the roadless
There were
areas.
16 roadless areas on the Medicine Bow. And I did field work, and instead of using the Forest Service's criteria, which was not in accordance with the wilderness.
Very biased.
Exactly. I critiqued the shit out of that, did my own evaluation based on the Wilderness Act, and then also had another section in there that was not a random survey, but a targeted survey. So I asked the same questions for each leader of the interest groups involved in the process. So it was the snowmobilers, it was the motorcycle guys. There were no mountain bikes at the time. There were no ATVs at the time. There were the sawmill guys. There were the tree hugger guys, and the whole thing, and the ranchers, and so I did that. The results of all that, and then it somehow was used by the local conservation groups there. They call it the Koehler report for
Koehler report.
Yeah,
That's pretty elaborate for a master's thesis in outdoor recreation.
yeah. Well, and one of the reasons it's interesting. I mean, we're kind of drifting into the college, the grad school stuff, but I did 6 drafts of my final thesis. The final draft of the thesis was 6 tries,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in the winter, so it was like December, and I'm trying to graduate, and it's like 50 below in Laramie without the wind.
Right, and the wind's blowing.
and so I would draft the next draft, type it on my manual typewriter, no magic
Before
fingers,
computers.
and then would go ahead and turn it in, and then wait a week till the advisor would give it back to me. I was his first grad student. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was as hard on you as he thought his advisor was on him.
The guy's a complete, yeah. So he went ahead, and the kicker was, this was the 6th draft. He had looked at this one part, and he said, "Oh, what is it? Get rid of this shit," And so he crosses a bunch of stuff out and writes a whole bunch of new stuff in this one critical paragraph. And I said, "Okay, I'll put yours in verbatim." And so I go back, I laboriously type this thing up again, bring it to him, hand it over, and he comes back, looks at it, and then he comes back and says, "Well, what's this shit?"
His paragraph.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I went to the head of the department. I said, I can't do this any longer. And independently, this other grad student who was studying, some municipal recreation, something or other, he had gone to the head of the department and said the same thing. And so the head of the department said, like, fix this, this, and that. We'll schedule your oral exams in 2 weeks, and you're done. Yeah.
Right.
But it was the way the talk about, you know, some stuff, some higher powers going on that you have no control. But have some mysterious, I mean, who the hell knows how this all worked out? But when I was looking for a thesis topic, I went to the Forest Service and said, you know, so what's going on with the Recreation Department? What's, you know, what's this or that? And they said, well, we got this ideal project for you. There's this little ski area outside of Laramie, really, really kind of low-key community kind of ski area. Not very good or challenging, nothing like that. So we want you to get, you know, survey the use patterns here. Where are all these people coming from? They'd like to ski here. I said, what's that going on to? And he said, well, you probably end up standing in the parking lot or sitting in the car in the parking lot checking license plates. And that's what you're going to write your thesis about. And I said, I don't know, I better think about it. So I'm walking out, I mean, this is the classic. I'm walking out of the Forest Service, and I walked by the office that I didn't know who was working there. But it turned out they were the Outdoor Recreation Department. And I'm walking by, and I see this guy with a map, and he's drawing circles around, you know, boundaries and circles and shit. And I walked by, and then I turned, and I walked back in, and I said, excuse me. And I explained who I was and what I was up to. I said, are you working on something here? And he goes, yeah, it's this wilderness area review thing we're doing. And I kind of went, oh boy, this sounds like interesting stuff. And that was the moment that opened the door to the thesis, that opened the door to the Wilderness Society give me, I think, $100 for gas money to do the field work for the thesis. And they gave me, you know that the beater power wagon that Ed Abbey used to drive around in?
No, I can't remember.
This was like
a station wagon, right?
Go with like
Picture.
like the earliest Suburban or one of those big terrible trucks that eats a lot of gas and it gets no traction, not a four-wheel drive. That's what I ended up
driving around in.
Yeah, that was my University of Wyoming vehicle.
Did you go visit all the roadless areas?
Yeah.
And the Wilderness Society gave you a little bit of money to get out there and do it, so they were already aware of your project and were interested in what you were doing.
Yeah, Cliff Merritt was the guy. Cliff Merritt is totally an unsung hero, although we finally were able to, the field reps that he hired, we all got together and were able to lobby the Wilderness Society or shame them into it to give Cliff the Bob Marshall Award.
Was he a guy in Wyoming or something?
No, he ran the Denver regional field office. Yeah. So he oversaw he recruited all the field reps that were hired to organize for the primitive area hearings. It all took place in the early 70s.
Before Rare? When they were looking at...
Yeah. Well, Congress mandated, so in 64, mandated that by 74, there would be reports to Congress on every primitive area and how it should be managed.
Right.
And of course,
whether it should be wilderness or not.
Or boundary changes or not, or whatever.
Right.
The Blue Range,
here in Arizona,
north of here, is the only remaining primitive area from those days
that never got designated wilderness or released for development.
Exactly, and so it's still a primitive area under their rules and regulations. So with the Wilderness Society knew of me. Cliff, we had gone on a float trip around the North Platte River as part of the field work, and he was invited on there. And this is the same time that Dave Foreman got hired. He got hired maybe about a couple of weeks before I did.
And he was down in Albuquerque or somewhere in New Mexico?
Yeah.
And so, he was doing roadless area review stuff too at that time, right?
Yeah. And the whole goal was to, somebody's writing a book about Cliff's role, unsung role in this whole thing, because they built a field corps, and our goal was just to get as many people to these hearings as possible for all the old primitive areas. Like, I mean, I was doing Wyoming and a number of other states, and it worked out. It was grassroots at its finest, as far as I was concerned.
When did you graduate from your master's program, and when did you actually get hired on by the Wilderness Society?
Okay, so I graduated, I got the hell out of Laramie. It was 50 below weather, and went to see my folks who were down in Florida doing the snowbird thing. And I ended up working construction
in Florida
to make my theoretical grub stake that I figured on my birthday I was going to go to Alaska and try to get hired on at the state park system or something. That was all the theoretical. Meanwhile, I became the consummate construction worker mindset dude, where I would get up in the morning, slug a bunch of orange juice down, eat a banana or two. My dad would drop me off at the construction site, and I was just a basic laborer. And my job was to mix cement and lug the buckets full of cement to the mason. That was it. Totally mindless, and it was good hard work. But then when I come home at the end of the day, I'd take my boots off and then jog back the 5 miles back to my parents' place, and sit at the rules at the kitchen table were, you guys, mom and dad, you take whatever you want, but whatever is not on your plates, I am going to devour. Yeah, and essentially, it's history. And then I'd sit in front of the TV and pound down a 6-pack of beer, and it'd be a slug, and then go to bed and wake up at the crack of dawn and go to work at the construction site. I was the only guy that had one of those old miner, not your typical hard hat, but one of the ones like from the Treasure of Sierra Madre, the round ones. It doesn't matter, but it had a Wilderness Society sticker on the front and a Save the American Bald Eagle on the back. That's what I was wearing at the construction site. And whenever it would become lunchtime, all the labor guys would all be talking in a circle about women in hot cars and NASCAR and stuff, and I was off looking for ospreys that were fishing in. It was kind of there. But it was just before I was ready to go that Cliff called me up.
In Florida, he found you at your folks' house.
Yeah, and he said, you want to work? And I said, you bet. And he said, okay, we've just gotten a grant. We can't afford a lot of money for a long period of time, but we can give you $400 a month for 3 months. And that was all expenses. It was included in that. So gas money and all that. And I said, okay, how about $300 a month for 4 months? And he goes, deal. and so the next thing I knew, I was in Washington, D.C. at a training session. This is like 3 or 4 days later.
Oh, that quick.
And back to D.C., go through this training session. As part of the training session, there's this hearing going on. And this is a really funny story. Harry Crandall, I won't go, there's some great mentors in my life. Harry Crandall and Ernie Dickerman were two of them.
These are congressmen?
No, these were staffers for
Wilderness Society.
Good old boys, like really low key. I wouldn't call them lobbyists. Lobbyists to me are Sweets Bucket, oil company guys. We're more advocates, and we educate and inform rather than pressure and buy influence. Anyways, so Harry says, "So you're from Wyoming, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, have you ever seen the glacier primitive area?" And this is what became the Fitzpatrick. Got renamed because Senator Gail McGee was a historian, and he started naming stuff after all these trappers, Jim Bridger and Fitzpatrick and such. He said, "You ever been in the glacier primitive area?" I said, "Well, I've actually been in there." He said, "Have you ever seen it?" I said, "Of course. You drive right when you go through Du Bois to Jackson. So right up there by Whiskey Mountain, that's where all the bighorn sheep are and everything else." And he goes, "This is good. You're testifying tomorrow." So I frying pan into the fire. Holy shit. Fortunately, all I had to do was read a prepared statement from a former Forest Service ranger. But I had to go through, it was like the whole, "Here you go, dude. You're in it now."
Cool. Did you bring your guitar to your first hearing?
No.
No, of course not.
There have been a couple public hearings where I have played the guitar and sung. The most recent one, I think, was in Alaska a couple of years ago during the roadless rule, when they were trying to exclude the Tongass from the roadless rule.
Oh, yeah.
I basically, Bob Dylan was singing in those days. So this is the early 70s. I was playing with my brother for a couple of years, and then when I was working for the Wilderness Society as a field rep, I'd always had my guitar with me, and I'd play in people's houses, and there was just a really cool network of strong-hearted people. And I guess I was most influenced by when we started doing this thing, this approaching the roadshow. It basically, I was really influenced by Pete Seeger and by Joan Baez. I mean, just the way she approached it as an advocate and explained every song. And Pete, I did a low rent version of what Pete would do. Is he would go in to get into an audience, he'd teach them the chorus of the song, he'd tell them the history, teach them the chorus, and like yesterday, for each song I probably would have spent a little more time doing the chorus, because that's what we used to do in the road show, is teach them the chorus, have them sing the chorus back to you. Then you own the song entirely, so then together you sing that whole thing. And he was just a master at that. And it's just like, there are ways to get people's interest and pique their interest, or excite them, or engage them, or whatever you want to call it. But music has a way to get to people. It's a way to get to people that no other, art, paintings, any form of art touches a part of our sensory systems and body and soul in a way that nothing else can. It's like the beauty of the mountains right out here, putting it on canvas or on film, putting it in a video. All that is pictures worth 1,000 words. Seeing is believing, and believing in having faith that good people can do good things when given an opportunity. And I'm kind of the never-ending optimist on all this. And it's be able to do this when you can touch people with songs it just strikes a nerve and strikes a part of their heart and their heartbeat that, that there's no other way to do it. That was one of the keys of the road show, was having people get, and it was funny because when I first started out with the songbook, most of those were simple sing-alongs. They weren't proud, but I mean they serve a purpose, and they're readily understood songs in there. Like there's Tom Dooley, the song, you take that tune and you turn it into Put Down Your Axe, Paul Bunyan, or something to the tune of You're Cheating Hard, and then you turn it into a broadcast against clear cutting and stuff like that. But then later I started writing more and more of my own stuff and less of your standard sing-along, so you got the full range.
What was your first song where you put advocacy lyrics together?
The first one was One According, Froggy One According, because it was so simple. And then we sort of built the songbook from there. I think it was, we didn't really have an intention of doing the songbook necessarily from the get-go, but then again we wanted people, so we just hand pieces of paper to people. There'd be maybe a half dozen songs at most that they all knew, and then all of a sudden it was like, well, why don't we do a songbook? And it worked for the IWW.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Red Songbook.
yeah, and I didn't know much about those guys. I knew Woody Guthrie and what he was up to. And I've done versions of This Land Is Your Land that I actually sang like a seemingly countless number of choruses. Right, this land is your land, this land is my land, and then you pick out different landmarks, and then it was when people tried to sell the public lands.
The privatization movement.
Yeah, and it was keep the public lands in public hands. This land is your hand. And you just sing it on and on, and then you start preaching. You're talking about this, the Desert Toyas or the Black Rock Desert, or you just insert all these different names of places that people know and love. And all of a sudden, we're out there picketing Ted Cruz when he was running for president in Reno, in a very cold night. And I was out there, or Johnny, so one of us was out there leading the marching group, and that stuff still works.
When did you come up with the stage name Johnny Sagebrush?
No, that's a good question. Johnny came about. This was going on when the Sagebrush Rebellion was at its height.
You want to explain what that was?
Well, we could, or we could have our esteemed. The Sagebrush Rebellion was.
Late 70s, early 80s, a movement in the West by property rights advocates who were arguing that there was too much government regulation and too much government-owned land, national forests, national parks, BLM land, etc. And they wanted those lands turned over to the states because resource development interests, oil and gas and ranching industry, etc., had more clout at the state level with state level politics, and they thought they'd be able to get more access, less restricted access to the resources on public lands if those could be turned over to the states and eventually privatized, because the states really didn't have the resources to manage those lands, and they kind of let business do what they want, and often were willing to sell those lands to generate revenue. So that was the Sagebrush Rebellion, was a rebellion against government ownership. And
didn't James Watt sort of build on that?
Yeah.
he was a big advocate of it, and when he came into Washington under Reagan, he brought the Sagebrush Rebellion ideology with him and their goals.
They were all about that. Where Johnny fit in on this one was
Johnny Sagebrush.
Johnny Sagebrush. The name itself. At that time, symbols for our federal government agencies, which I prefer to call public land management agencies. And you have to remember that people often misstate this innocently enough, but it's not Forest Service lands. It's National Forest lands managed in trust by the Forest Service. It's not BLM lands. It's public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, often the Bureau of Mismanagement, or lost meaning is another one.
Bureau of Livestock and Mining.
Right.
Another one was the Bureau of Large Mistakes. So you had the rebellion part and you had the sagebrush part, and the only symbols that we knew of that were well known was Smokey the Bear. The only other one was Woodsy Owl, which he'd been hammered. I think Tim Cahill, some very talented writer wrote something in Outside Magazine, I think, talking about Woodsy Owl, and he called him the Clown Owl. Because he was this stupid-looking owl wearing this funny-looking hat and had big feet, and he would come up to somebody and say, "Hoot, hoot, don't pollute," you know, and whoever was, you know, bulldozing the place apart or cutting the trees down would say, "Hey, get out of the way, you stupid little owl." You know? So Woodsy Owl didn't stand a chance with him every time. But Smokey was a presence, and he had a big ass shovel, and he'd smack anybody. So we were kind of looking for some lasting symbol. The only other one around was Johnny Horizon. And Johnny Horizon was the symbol of the BLM.
Wow, never heard that one.
Yeah, well, go back in time.
Horizon.
Johnny Horizon was a cowboy kind of looking guy. He had, the only thing he didn't have was a beard. Otherwise, he would have looked just like some of the Earth First founders, believe it or not. And so here I am in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm sitting there with a good friend who was named Jack Pugh, who was a state senator at the legislature in Wyoming, in Cheyenne. And we're at the Albany bar. Somehow Albany pulls up again. So, and I'm talking to Jack, and saying, "We got to do something about the Sagebrush Rebellion thing." And he immediately leaps into the idea that he wants to be Johnny Sagebrush's manager. And he's weaving, the creative mind is going wild, and he's going, and I'll get the pink Cadillac with the big, the convertible with the big long horns on the front, and he'll call himself Ringo Derango. And he was going to be Johnny's manager. And then Johnny was going to write all these, this is the key point, was going to write all these basically pro-Sagebrush Rebellion songs, but with little twists and turns in them, where if you really, you kind of think there's something else going on, but most of the people we were dealing with didn't catch on at all. So Johnny was going to, so this was the storyline. Johnny was going to start writing these songs, and instead of being anti-Sagebrush Rebellion, which is what he ended up turning out to be, he was pro-Sagebrush Rebellion, and he'd sing these couple songs, and he went top of the charts. He was selling millions and millions of dollars for, he was just pocketing all this money about this the Sagebrush Rebellion music. But he had an incredible case of stage fright. So he could absolutely freeze up. So he never appeared in public. but he would just crank out these #1 hits, one after another. And at the end of the storyline was he was finally going to do his farewell concert because the pressure of being a celebrity was too much. He was just a poor old cowboy guy, you know. And he was going to sing at the Mormon Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, backed by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And that was going to be his one and only public appearance. And then he was retiring. That was what we were cooking up at this bar, and instead we said, "Oh, that's fucked up. That isn't going to work." And so Johnny became who he is, or who he became, and became anti-Sagebrush Rebellion. But it was all that. That's how Johnny got hashed. We needed a symbol along with the sagebrush.
So it wasn't to do a specific advocacy thing like a certain cause. You just started to get into this whole generic thing about wouldn't this be a cool thing to put out there in the culture?
We had to come up with a name for the singer. It had to be something. People. We were going to a rally in Jackson Hole against Jim Watt one time. This was in '82 when we were fighting for the Grove and doing the blockade and all that. And I remember I was looking for a shirt to wear for this rally against Jim Watt, who happened to be in town at the time. And some guy was saying, "So, are you going to some occasion or something?" I said, "Well, I'm buying a shirt for Johnny Sagebrush. He's showing up, later today." And he goes, "Oh, Johnny, well, yeah, how's he doing?" He's got a couple of hits out there because it sounded like Johnny's paycheck or Johnny this or Johnny, it was just I just had to chuckle. But Johnny was kind of larger than life in his own world, wherever that is right now. So that's where Jack Pugh was the guy responsible for that, and he's still out there somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
But it's one of those times sitting around a beer, and not much different than Thirst First.
So when you were doing this, you were with the Wilderness Society. Did they give you a hard time about you being more radical?
I had left the Wilderness Society in
1981.
There's a very vivid account of it. I left on my birthday in 1979. I was trying to save the world on all fronts. The Wilderness Society was not being as hard-hitting as I wanted them to be. Bill Turnage come in and completely ripped the heart out of the organization. Was in the process. You could see the writing on the wall. I quit, wrecked my office in the process. A whole series of things. I ended up in a mental health ward after doing what you might call a nervous breakdown or whatever. There's an account of it in Susan Aiken's book, Coyotes and Town Dogs. Yeah, that's a pretty good account of it. I had it, but basically Turnage was going to get rid of the field corps. You get rid of the field corps, you get rid of the grassroots. Get rid of the grassroots, you might as well just, blow your brains out. And that's, at 79, I left. I had some difficult emotional times. I ended up in some friends of mine, Mike and Joyce Evans, had a ranch, and I went out there and worked as a ranch hand, clear my head, just be able to, unlike environmental work where it starts and it may never end. If you had to fix 10 feet of fence, you could do that. And you get all cut up and bloody and sweaty and feel good about it, and you're done. And it took about 6 months for me to get my head straight. At the same time, I was working with Dave, and we started doing this first stuff, and one thing led to another, and we ended up going down to Mexico and forming the group. It was never really a group. It was more of a band of badasses.
So, just very briefly then, to wrap up, I am interested in that sort of formative moment. So there was a group of you who went down to Mexico.
Yeah.
It wasn't just these the so-called 5 founders of Earth First. And did you go down with any intent of like trying to start something new, or that just came out of that mountain?
I think we drove down with a lot of frustration, all tightly squeezed into Dave's van. And we were heading down to the Gran Desierto near Sonoya. That's where it is, right?
Yeah. Just
It's the harshest desert country that Ed Abbey ever talked about or ever experienced. And we went there, and symbolically we were going to climb the highest peak, and we ended up climbing the wrong peak because from the distance they look exactly alike. But when we came back down and we kept churning these ideas around, saying somebody ought to do something about it, and somebody ought to do something about it. And eventually it sort of hashed itself with a number of, percolations here and there going on. But, I mean, there wasn't like an announcement that, it wasn't like, we're going down to Mexico and forming a group. It wasn't like that. It was, we're going to Mexico and we're going to experience the rawness of all this. We're going to take out our frustrations somehow, or get rid of our frustrations, and then see if there's something we can do about it, or if something comes from it. Eventually, that's what happened.